come to the line, the finishing time. The long distance runner has stopped on the corner, but I won't give up, although I stop to before the end of me and you. The patchwork explains the land is unchanged. Interpret the rules, my tears in the typing pool. The letters are sighing, the ink is still drying. I told you the truth and now I sigh too. The page turns on me and you. Across that white plain, the land is unchanged.
During my years in high school, I was constantly surrounded by community, and if I wanted a moment of solitude, I had to very intentionally carve out this time. I was lucky enough to have my life enriched by many beautiful friendships, but I also didn't spend much time alone. My freshman year of college was quite the opposite. The moments of community were much more scarce, and solitude became my baseline state of being. Most days I spent alone. At first, I loved this feeling of freedom. It was blissful to hear my own thoughts and enjoy my own company. But as time went on, my state of being alone turned into a feeling of loneliness, and I became homesick for the larger communities to which I belonged. I realized that solitude and community, in extreme doses, felt unfulfilling in their own ways, and that there is an innate longing for balance between the two, that our souls need companionship as much as they need independence. Though I felt this tension, I couldn't articulate it, nor did I know why. After enrolling for a course centered around self-invention and authenticity, I learned that great thinkers have meditated on this human condition for years, and that these feelings are rooted in the very essence of authenticity. Potentially the most life-changing lesson I learned my first semester at Harvard is that authenticity requires solitude and community.
Succumb to the line, the finishing time.
My first day as a student in a class called Making the Self, Poetics of Authenticity, I came equipped with an understanding of authenticity as an individualistic pursuit. I thought that the virtue of authenticity could only be strengthened in solitude. To my surprise, the first lesson I learned completely challenged my already formed notions of authenticity. It was a lesson about Charles Taylor's book, The Ethics of Authenticity, and specifically what he coined the Great Chain of Being. He roots authenticity in historical beliefs that we are part of a larger cosmic order. He calls this a great chain of being. In other words, we belong to something bigger than ourselves, a heavenly hierarchy. Taylor suggests that individualism results in disenchantment because the world loses its magic without the awareness of interconnectedness. He also says that self-absorption, which often results from individualism, flattens and narrows our lives. So, by viewing ourselves as disparate individuals, detached from the great chain of being, we don't just become blind to the beauty of the world, but we also lose a part of ourselves. As Taylor puts it, without a sense of higher purpose, of something worth dying for, we lose a heroic dimension of our lives. When I began to put Charles Taylor's Great Chain of Being philosophy into practice, my life was elevated. My heart grew in humility because I began to live like a link within a great chain of being. When I began to face my gaze outwards rather than inwards, I could see a world of vibrant color and connectedness. The awareness of my smallness actually awakened me to the world's beauty and wonder. And I realized that the absence of self-absorption creates space for other-mindedness, a mind that looks for beauty in every small creature of the earth. In 1919, T.S. Eliot wrote an essay titled Tradition and the Individual Talent, where he talked about the idea of the poet being impersonal. He argued that the poet should submerge personal emotions into a broader tradition, and that the goal of the poet should be to constantly develop a consciousness of the past. I think that in Western ideology, the concept of an impersonal poet is strange and confusing, because when we think of poetry, we think of this as a deeply personal activity. But T.S. Eliot offers a vision of art that is separate from the personality of the artist. Art that doesn't strive for originality, but rather embraces its place in relation to every work of art that came before. Ironically, the greatest individual talent becomes the ability to sacrifice the self and create art that achieves objectivity, which completely subverted my prior beliefs. Roland Barthes took Eliot's idea one step further in his essay, The Death of the Author, in which he suggests that everything we create is a fundamental rearrangement of pre-existing art. So perhaps being an impersonal poet doesn't need to be a conscious act, and truthfully is inevitable. The fact that we can't create anything truly original is quite beautiful because it is proof that we are part of a cosmic connection and that we are part of something larger than ourselves. Within the works of Taylor, Eliot, and Barthes, there is a resonant theme of community. Put simply, the individual does not and cannot exist without community. In the context of authenticity, this means that we cannot merely look inward to fully know ourselves. We must understand the larger world, history, and tradition to which we belong to fully understand our purpose.
Succumb to the line, the finishing time.
At this point, my definition of authenticity was broadened from an egocentric lens to a community-oriented lens. However, that's only one side of the coin. It is true that authenticity involves individualism, and based on what I learned, authenticity requires solitude specifically. In Rainer Maria Rilke's famous letters to a young poet, he advises that the only way to write poetry is to withdraw into yourself and retreat into solitude. For the creator must be a world in himself and must find everything in himself and in nature. He even suggests that we cannot listen to our inner voice if we direct our thoughts outwards. Now you may be questioning whether this contradicts the arguments made by Charles Taylor and T.S. Eliot, which seem to encourage an external awareness of life. Rilke actually advises the young poet to go into nature to write poetry, but he warns against listening to the artistic criticism from the outside world. So, Rilke brings a new perspective into the discussion of authenticity, which teaches us that while we can create art with a deep awareness of history and nature, we can do so in a perception-free manner, meaning we don't need the approval or warrant of others to create. In his letter, Rilke also says, "The creative worker knows no bareness and no poor, indifferent place. Even if you are in a prison whose walls prevented all the bustle of the world from reaching your senses, even then, would you not still have your childhood, that precious kingly wealth, that treasure house of memories?" I love this quote because to me, it means that each person has a childhood that serves as an eternal reservoir of creativity. Each of us has a rich inner world unlike anybody else's. To live authentically is to recognize the power that you harness within yourself and the source of abundant creativity that you behold. We come to know that inner world through time spent alone. Perhaps one of the most influential authors on the importance of individuality is Henry David Thoreau, who spent 2 years living in the woods in solitude. In his words, "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. Thoreau emphasized the desire for Spartan simplicity and elevation of purpose. He says, "Every morning was a cheerful invitation to make my life of equal simplicity, and may I say innocence, with nature herself." So, it seems that discovering who we are, stripped of everything else, enables us to decipher our purpose and live authentically. Solitude is more than just merely being alone, but actually spending quality time with yourself. When I began practicing solitude, life felt more meaningful because I had stripped away the inessential. Through solitude, the sound of my inner voice became more familiar, and by distinguishing my voice from the opinions of the outside world, I could follow my creative callings with more courage and align my actions with the vision I had for my life.
Succumb to the line, the finishing time.
So, at what point do community and solitude intersect? How do we unite these seemingly opposed ideals? I think the synthesis of the individualistic self and the collective self is best captured in Walt Whitman's poem Song of Myself. Whitman begins the poem with a kind of invocation, saying, "I celebrate myself and sing myself." Yet, later in the poem says, "Of every hue and caste am I, of every rank and religion, a farmer, mechanic, artist, gentleman, sailor, Quaker, prisoner, fancy man, rowdy, lawyer, physician, priest." While Whitman celebrates his individuality, he also recognizes the lineage that came before him and the larger humanity to which he belongs. One of the most famous lines from this poem is, "I am large, I contain multitudes." In other words, the self can hold vast and contradictory qualities. Individualism and community may seem antithetical, yet we need both to live authentically. We can be self-reliant while also being profoundly connected to the great chain of being. We can value both personal freedom and oneness. We are complex creatures with contradictory thoughts and experiences. We are beautiful because we contain rare, unique, one-of-a-kind individual beauty, and because we contribute a single note that harmonizes with all of humanity. We are a single thread in the tapestry of mankind, and yet an important and individual thread. True authenticity embraces connection and community and the sanctity in solitude.
Succumb to the line, the finishing time. The long distance runner has stopped on the corner.